below. So this is the castle known as Hellsgarde that lives in the haunted marsh at dusk to free her men from college shackles. Joiry's lady must venture onward.
Hello, Howie Bentley here. Welcome to episode number 7 of Sword and Sorcery Heavy Metal. Today, Matthew Knight and I will be discussing C.L. Moore's Jirel of Joiry tale, Hellsgarde. Let's get on to the discussion. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Howie. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. How you doing today?
Pretty good. Not bad.
Awesome. So we are discussing Hellsgarde by C.L. Moore today. And I'm going to go ahead and say it, and John can put it on the screen, spoiler alert, because I don't think there's any way we can discuss this story without them.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, it's less of an action, which most of her stories are, most of the Jirel stories are, less of an action story and more a weird tale or even a cosmic horror type story.
Yeah.
So, do you want to do the synopsis, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, I can explain the gist of it. Like you say, this is more of a weird horror tale, I think, than Sword and Sorcery. And like you just said, I think most of the Jirel of Joiry stories fall in that category, really. So in this tale, and this is kind of, I don't think they go necessarily in any kind of order, but this is the last story in most of the anthologies. There was one I think she did as a side one where she hooks up with Northwest Smith and all that, but
that was with her future husband, Henry Kuttner. The name of the story is I made a note of it. Quest of the Starstone, yeah. Quest of the Starstone. And I had actually read that in this book here. Can you see that? You may have a copy of this too, Echoes of Valor. That's where I discovered C.L. Moore. And that was really the only Jirel story that was in that book. And I didn't mean to take over your synopsis there, but I just wanted to throw that in since you mentioned that story that is not in the volume I have of the Jirel. I don't know if you have yours with you or not, but this is the one I have, and it does not include that story. So, but fortunately, I have it in Echoes of Valor. But the original stories, there were 5 of them. And this was, like you said, the last one. So anyway, I'll stop interrupting you. Go ahead there.
Sure. And yeah, the first time I read it also was, well, the first time I read Hellsgarde, which Hellsgarde was the first C.L. Moore story I ever read. And the first time I read it was in this anthology, Sword and Sorcery.
That's an old one.
Yeah, and this is an excellent book. I would recommend this to anyone who wanted to get into Sword and Sorcery and experience, the early pulp authors. I mean, this is like one of the really good classic anthologies. Definitely check it out. El Sprague de Camp edited it. But anyway, yeah, back to the story. So Jirel is the commander of an army in this fictional province of medieval France. She's almost like a Joan of Arc kind of figure. So a lot of the stories, she's going into these other worlds or kind of taboo lands to seek out an instrument of vengeance, or not vengeance, but a way out of a situation. And in this story, she's going to the castle of Hellsgarde, which is kind of like this mythical legend. The castle only appears at sunset in this marsh. And all of her men have been imprisoned, and she's stuck with this dilemma about how to get out of this situation. There's this enemy, Guy of Garlet, and he's got the men of Joiry, in shackles. So she is venturing to Hellsgarde, which again is like this kind of phantom castle, if you will, because she's searching for some way to get back at Guy of Garlet and free her men. And the castle is said to be cursed, and it's said that there's this weird thing going on there, and anybody who treads upon this curse, you know, it's bad news. So she has this idea that she's gonna kind of use that against her foe. So that's how it all kind of starts, and then it goes into this sort of like almost like a gothic haunted castle ghost story with, again, like you said, with like this weird cosmic horror twist. And yeah, like I don't really want to give it all away, but like you say, kind of do have to go into some of the details. There's a strange family that inhabits the castle. They have this leader, this guy named Alaric, and he's sort of like, I don't think it really explains the relation to the characters, but they're like this weird kind of family of, they almost seem like inbred freaks kind of. So when she enters the castle, which getting to the castle, you know, there's all this weirdness and everything. I won't give it away. And that's some of the beauty.
You can tell us about your painting. That would be a good point to tell us about your song, Hellsgarde, with the painting on the cover of Eternal Winter, Archaic Lore and Shrine, makes a reference to a very macabre scene as she rides upon the castle.
Absolutely. And the beginning of that story, it's basically the imagery from the very first page of the story, which I always was really taken with. And I wanted to represent that. I have that right here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it in the shot, but this is the actual painting. I don't know if you can really see it all.
Yeah, just move it around a little bit. If you would bring it, push it up there.
So
there's Jirel.
Right. So this was painted by Louis Braquette, and he did a really excellent job of portraying this scene where she's coming up on the castle of Hellsgarde. Somewhere you can see like there's like these, you know, these soldiers impaled, and then she kind of like, I had the idea of having him add those like phantoms coming out of the castle. So anyway, this is the actual painting, but of course that, you know, anybody can see it because it's the album cover. But yeah, so that is a good representation of, you know, what's going on at the beginning. And it's just, yeah, like you say, it's this very macabre, mysterious atmosphere. And then, you know, she basically conquers her fear and enters the castle and then has this whole wild adventure. Getting back to what I was saying about the weird family, that scene always really reminded me a lot of, there's a scene in a Clark Ashton Smith vampire tale called A Rendezvous in Averoigne, and there's a very similar thing going on where the main character, his name's, oh God, I can't remember, like another French name, and that's another a thing that's similar, is it's like a medieval French thing, which his Averoigne stories were too. But anyway, real similar scene where he's in this dining room with these weird people, and has to have this like weird awkward meal with these sort of like undead, you know, henchmen. And I think there's even a similarity where like she explains it here, like even eating the food, like it is like a taint to it, and something's just weird about the whole thing. So that was something that was kind of similar, that I always noted. But yeah, from there it goes on to where there's this curse that the guy Alaric is kind of not really wanting to go into, but she realizes that something strange is going on, and there's this mark of blood on the flagstones, and once she treads on her own to this mark of blood, she's assaulted by the phantom. His name is Andred, and he's this damned ghost that inhabits the castle. So from there, it kind of takes her into this weird, she's like ascends into this like maelstrom of this cosmic energy, and then kind of ends up in weird places in the castle and goes through this weird adventure trying to figure out how she's going to, you know, conquer this ghost, and then also again how she's going to use that against her enemy, which is the reason she came there in the beginning. That's pretty much the best synopsis I can kind of give without totally, giving away everything.
And the interesting thing there, you talked about how she was assaulted there, standing on where that blood stain was. And you notice what the ghost or the entity that's the undead or the undeath or whatever they referred to him as in the story, he kisses her. And that's a common theme in these Jirel stories is, the first story in the book is Black God's Kiss. Yeah. And the kiss, and these are rape fantasies is what these are. She's assaulted, and with a kiss, of course, it's symbolic for more, but that's what I interpret it as. So, and it happened. I don't know how long that's been since you read the other stories. I remember well Black God's Kiss, and of course, we just reread this one. The other stories, I think, were very similar. Do you remember the kiss being in any of the other Jirel stories?
I cannot remember. I've always noted that Black God's Kiss and Hellsgarde have a similar. It's a different guy, but it's the same kind of concept of this sort of male conqueror, kind of like, suppressing her, and she's got to do something to get back at them. And she always has this notion of revenge too. She's always like, she is seeking revenge, even though it's her way out of the situation. And I think that kind of goes with her character. Moore always describes her as having these yellow eyes, and I think that's symbolic. I always thought of that as being symbolic as a lioness, and I think she refers to her as the lioness of Joiry a lot of times. So, she's not someone you want to mess with. But the thing that's so great is she's not a female Conan character, which would be unrealistic anyway. She's not out there kicking brawny dudes' asses or anything. Everything she does, she relies on courage and cunning, and that's what makes her such an amazing character, I think.
Well, those are traditionally female strengths, whereas a man traditionally is big and strong. A woman uses cunning and her feminine wiles to her advantage. And that's one of the things I like about these stories is they aren't ridiculous with the female warrior thing, this inflated, unrealistic thing. Is she uses her brain to get her out of these situations, and she always ends up, on the winning end. But anyway, this Guy Gerlo or Guy Gerlot, who has sent her there, he sent her there to get that box. That is what they're looking for. And I know you didn't want to go into this because it is a spoiler, but as I said, we'll put that on the screen at the beginning. But that box is some sort of, there's generally in these sword and sorcery stories, and probably in fiction in general, these objects. There are these objects that are a center of focus. And like I said before, last video we were talking about was that juju staff that Enlonga gave to Solomon Kane. And then you have more commonly your magic swords, magic rings and stuff. But there's this box. There's this mysterious box. And that's what she's sent there for. That's the bargain. She's supposed to get this box. It's a treasure. It's referred to as a treasure. And bring it back to Garlo or Garlot. And his agreement is to free her men. But then all this thing happens, and it happens at this family. And here's where, if I'm telling viewers right now, if you don't want to hear the end of this, you want to turn it off now, read the story, and then come back. But what happens is they use her as bait to invoke this presence there. And that's because they feed on undeath, this weird inbred looking family.
Yeah.
And they're feeders on undeath. So they don't care about the treasure box, and they let her have the treasure box and let her go after she goes and invokes this presence that at first assaults her. But then she has the box, and they warn her. The warning at the end is, I'm just going to let you know, don't open that box. For your own good, don't open that box. And so, she's smiling by them because she's going to take it back to Garlic, and he's going to open that box, and that's going to be the end of him. So
Right.
even if he fails on coming through with the bargain, what he's told her he will do, even not fails, but even if he doesn't come through with the bargain, she still got him.
Right. Yeah, I was trying to not give it away too much, but since we are, I will say that one thing that I always found really interesting is so like you said, the family is trying to get her to invoke the spirit of Andred, and they feed on the ghost energy of the phantom. And it's described, I believe, that they do this every so many years. And I always thought it's almost like this spiritual awakening they have when they feed on the ghost energy. It's like they're like, they change. At the end, there's a big change between them. And when she wakes up from the whole experience, and the guy Alaric approaches her, he's like, okay, this is all done, you can go now, we're satisfied, kind of thing. And it's pretty interesting if you think about like the time of C.L. Moore. There wasn't a whole lot to take influence from besides those gothic fiction authors, and of course the other guys that were writing for Weird Tales, Lovecraft or whoever. So it's a pretty cool idea and creepy idea that she came up with, for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure she was very she says in this autobiographical thing, the blurb that was reprinted in the Echoes of Valor. I showed that a minute ago. I don't think I even told what it was, but Echoes of Valor 2, edited by Carl Edward Wagner. And that has those other stories, the Northwest Smith stories, and the one with Jirel and Northwest Smith, and which was a collaboration between her and her future husband, Henry Kuttner. But she mentions in this, anyway, I'm getting off subject here. She mentions that her main influences were Howard and Lovecraft. Of course, by the time this story was published, it was 1939, and Howard had been dead 3 years, and Lovecraft had been dead too, already by then. But they were very much an influence on her. But she had her own thing going on. And you mentioned Clark Ashton Smith earlier, and this is another way that those are similar. Of course, they've set them in this alternate medieval France is the setting, with the Averon stories, or however you say those that Clark Ashton Smith wrote. But with the Jirel stories and the Clark Ashton Smith's whole sword and sorcery thing, these are sword and sorcery stories, but they're light on the sword. Now, C.L. Moore had a more pronounced sword and sorcery setting, I think, in some ways, because Jirel is a warrior, but we never see her really doing combat. We're told, and she has all these men, like these henchmen and I don't even know what she's supposed to be. She's, I guess, a queen or a princess or whatever. She is some sort of nobility, but she never really does fight. I mean, she fights against they're small, what would you call them, scuffles or whatever, but she's not really, there's no big battle scene, on a battlefield like Robert Howard would have written, or David Gemmell, or Carl Edward Wagner. But there's more focus on the weird tale here. There's more focus on the cosmic horror here. And she had her own brand of cosmic horror.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I can't think of many instances at all where she's using a weapon. Like Black God's Kiss, there's a part where she enters the world, and there's like these weird creatures are at her legs, and she might slice them up or something like that. But there's no real instances where she's like really kicking anyone's ass or anything. Some of them are so like fantasy based, and when I say that, I don't mean like fantasy like dragons and elves or anything like that, but like the story Jirel Meets Magic, that's really out there. I think she crawls through a window into this like totally different world and has like all these wild experiences, and a lot of it is kind kind of has this fae sort of atmosphere, you know, it's kind of pagan fairy tale kind of feeling, but again the same element of a weird dimension kind of thing. So yeah, the focus is that kind of thing. It's not really like her, you know, fighting or anything like that, which you think of most sword and sorcery characters, you know, yeah, they're using their mind and doing what they're doing, but, you know, like you say, they're hacking people's heads off and stuff, and yeah, she doesn't really do that. At least it's alluded that she's leads her men in battle, and somehow like she is, they say she is Joiry, like she's the mastermind behind the whole thing. And in Black Guy's Kiss, it begins where she's like captured and they
under siege. Yeah.
Right. She's in the full armor and they're ripping the armor off her. And then the guy's like, the guy's shocked that, you know, she's a woman, and he plants a kiss on her and all that, which again is another reference to that. So, yeah, it's a totally different thing from anything I've read. I mean, I believe that Robert E. Howard was a fan of the Jirel stories, and I've read that it influenced him to work on some female characters. And while I like those stories a lot, I don't think that his female characters were as strong as Jirel, for example. To me, I think she's probably one of the ultimate women sword and sorcery characters, you know, because like we say, they always get into these sort of Amazon warrior type women, which it doesn't always work, you know.
Yeah, this is definitely not a C.L. Moore was not a feminist, and right. Of course there are people who want to hijack the Jirel stories now and make it about that, but these are definitely, if anything, not really pronounced, but somewhat anti-feminist stories. And one thing too, you have to think about the demographic she was writing for at the time with Weird Tales. It was mostly teenage boys and guys in their early 20s. It was definitely a male audience that she was writing these for. And I believe, and this is just speculation on my part, that she used her initials to break into the markets. So they would say, oh, this is, you know, a manuscript from a woman, toss it in the trash bin, you know, slush pile straight into the garbage can. So, and that was one thing when her husband, she had already made a name for herself with this writing, and her future husband, of course, was Henry Kuttner, very well-known science fiction author at one time, or at least science fantasy. And when he first wrote to her, he addressed it to Mr. C.L. Moore, because you cannot tell. Now, when you read some female authors, you can tell they're definitely females because they project a sort of feminine presence on male, if they're writing even male characters, they do that. Like, for example, I mentioned, what's her name, Morgan Llewellyn in the last video we did. Morgan Llewellyn, and by the way, I said she was Welsh. I looked that up after that. She's Irish, but that's a Welsh name, Llewellyn. But maybe her married name. But anyway, Morgan Llewellyn, I really enjoy her stuff, but you can tell some of it is just really awkward because she projects a female sort of presence onto the male characters. C.L. Moore didn't, well, I don't know, Northwest Smith, from what I remember, she didn't do that with him. Of course, she's writing about Jirel here, but there's one point in that story too, in Hellsgarde, where Jirel walks into the castle, and she's going to establish her presence there in front of everyone, and she gets in front of the fire to sort of show off her body a little bit to the guys and the females, to let her know, you know, she's the one there. And so that was something that a male author would have done, but not a female author. So I think she knew her demographic, she knew her market and who was going to be reading her tales, and she wrote for those accordingly back in the day. Yeah,
she sort of mined the reader, because it's easy to there's nothing really sexy going on with the character at all. So she kind of has to, every now and then she'll make a comment like, where, and it's usually when she's referring to the men, something like any man would lust after her or something like that. But you don't get that from reading the story. It's very mysterious, and you're kind of taken by her emotions and her experience. So, I've noted that too, where she'll have to kind of remind the reader that she is a woman beneath all this armor, and men are after her, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I forgot all about that. There's that part in Hellsgarde. And when I when I had Lewis paint the album cover, I specifically told him, like, I was kind of explaining how she should look and how she should be represented. And I told him I didn't want her to look like this sexy, Amazon chick or anything. That's not how she is. And he's really good at that kind of thing. So it worked out. But that was something that I wanted her to have, this kind of sincere, kind of grim, look, because that's the way I interpret the character. And I know what you mean about, sometimes you can tell the gender of the author because of the energy of the story. And I mean that in a way of atmosphere and imagery, and look at Tanith Lee. Her stuff is very unique, and just like C.L. Moore, it has this feminine quality, but it somehow adds to the uniqueness of their interpretation of the weird. It's so I think that is what sets them apart from, say, Clark Ashton Smith, who is equally as weird or more so. The fact that they're viewing this from a woman's perspective, it changes it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the weird too, the perspective of the weird. And that made me think, C.L. Moore, her name was Catherine Lucille Moore. C.L. Moore was very sickly as a child. She had some serious health problems. And a number of writers are like that. You notice these things that are in common with certain types of artists and writers in particular, what we're talking about here. You have to wonder how some of this stuff that they may have seen in fever dreams when they were young and sickly and in bed a lot, and that's why they read so much, and why they became so good with language is because they read so many books, because they couldn't get up and do a lot of physical activity. And Bram Stoker comes to mind too. Bram Stoker was like that as well. As a child, he was very sickly and in bed a lot. And of course, if you want to mention Mary Shelley, she is an opium fever dream. That candy, what do you call it, that they all used to eat with the opium candy? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. And she had that fever dream, and that's what inspired her to create Frankenstein. But there were a number, and I guess Robert E. Howard was, had some health problems. I don't know if he was in bed a lot as a child. H.P. Lovecraft was in pretty bad shape. Most of his life he was kind of sickly. But I'm just, speculating on. I wonder how much of these weird ideas came from some sort of fever dream.
Yeah, I know. I've had a lot of weird dreams that I've turned into story ideas. Quite a few. One of my early tales, Cult of Ivana, appeared in the Barbarian Crowns. Those were my earlier stories before I really kind of figured out what I was doing. But the opening scene of that story, where the barbarian guy is standing in front of, he's like a barbarian guy doing ice fishing, and there's these majestic mountains surrounding everything, and the snow tigers come out and get him, and then he runs away from these snow tigers and enters his cave and has this adventure. That was a dream I had that was happening to me, and I woke up and immediately was like, I need to write that down. I need to, kind of finish that adventure. And there's other examples of that too. I wish I could think of more. But yeah, I've definitely experienced that. So yeah, people that were back during that time, bedridden a lot, especially like you say, if they're all doped out, who knows what kind of wild dreams they're having. That very well could be the case. I never thought about that, except for my own experiences, but you might have something there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think I already mentioned, but Hellsgarde was published in 1939. Yeah, I mentioned that because it was 2 years after Lovecraft's death, 3 years after Robert E. Howard's death. But her first story to get published was, I think you pronounce it Shamblu,
Right.
was in the November 1933 issue of Weird Tales. Or was it Weird Tales? Yeah, it was Weird Tales. And she got $100 for that, which I understand was more than she made in a month at her regular job working with the bank. But so that was when she broke into the thing in November 1933. Now, Black God's Kiss was the first Jirel story to appear in Weird Tales the next year. It was 1934. So, if you were to recommend, I know you've read these more recently than I have, the whole collection more recently than I have. The stories I read the most, the story I've read the most is Black God's Kiss. But I read the whole collection one time, Black God's Kiss a second time. I think I read the story after Black God's Kiss in there too. And then, in the recent reread of Hellsgarde. So if you could recommend one story to our viewers from a Jirel story, would it be Hellsgarde?
Yeah, I would. I think that story is unique in the collection in that it's more of a gothic ghost story sort of atmosphere. I guess I would say Black God's Kiss probably because it has more of the weird otherworldly adventure thing going on. And hell, I would say read the whole collection because it's not very long, and I think the stories complement one another nicely. So it's hard to choose. If I were to say one, Hellsgarde is my favorite, which is funny because a lot of people it's their least favorite. I've read that a lot. People say it's the weakest one, but I think it's because they're expecting sword and sorcery and it's different. And I think it might be one of the longer ones too. But probably Black God's Kiss, which is I think probably the most iconic Jirel story. That's probably the one I would recommend to someone who wanted to get into it and was expecting sword and sorcery, or would prefer it to be a sword and sorcery kind of thing.
And that's a good one because I haven't ruined that one for everyone.
There you go.
Yeah.
And Shamblu that's one of our most popular ones too. Of course, that's a science fiction Northwest of Smith thing that kind of ties in with the Medusa myth. It's a pretty wild tale. That's another one. If someone wanted to experience something outside of her medieval Joiry thing, that'd be a good one to look into. Yeah.
I have a number of collections of her fiction, and reading this Hellsgarde made me want to read some of those that I've never read. Like I said, I read the Jirel stories. I read some of the Northwest Smith. I haven't even read all the Northwest Smith stories. And do you remember anything about the Quest of the Starstone? It was so long ago. It's been at least 20 to 25 years since I've read that story. You remember anything about it?
I not much because I reread that anthology a couple times, and I mostly read the original collection, the one that you showed earlier. But they reprinted that quest because I don't have that Echoes of Valor book. But the new I think it's like Planet Stories edition, of Black God's Kiss, that has that in it, and I read it once. And I can't remember much about it except it's kind of what you would imagine a meeting of those two, which is kind of wild, But as far as her other works outside of Jirel or Northwest Smith, there's a book. It's I think it's just called The Best of C.L. Moore. And I think that was like a series. I think it was like The Best of Lord Dunsany, a bunch of those classic guys and gals, I guess. And the one that's called The Best of C.L. Moore, that has some pretty obscure, short, weird pulp tales, and a lot of them are pretty out there. I remember there's one that's I can't remember the title of it, but it has to do with like the Lilith myth and this Garden of Eden thing, and it's like her own take on that, and that's really cool. remember really enjoying that story. I can't remember the name. I'll have to get back to you on the name of that story, but it's in that collection. There's another collection called Judgment Night, and that one is like again, it's the kind of thing where I have it and I know I read it, but it's been so long. It's like if you don't revisit it, your mind kind of forgets it. But that one I enjoyed too, and that's I think it's a collection of similar stories or something like that. I'll have to go back and revisit that. I know it has a really cool cover. So yeah, that's pretty much my experience with C.L. Moore, those works.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you want to add anything else to the discussion? I guess we need to talk a little bit about Hellsgarde, the story or the song Hellsgarde, sure, on Archaic Lore and Shrine, the Eternal Winter album. Do the lyrics pretty much follow the story, or okay? And it's a long song, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The song is almost 13 minutes long. It's I consider it like what somebody would consider the title track of an album, even though it's not the title. It's sort of the main, the main guy on there. Yeah, long song. The music, I believe, is a pretty good representation of the atmosphere of that song. It's one of the more kind of somber, doomy sort of tracks on there. Very progressive, goes through a lot of different parts. I think it's the longest song I've written. Yeah, definitely it would be. That'd be the longest one. And yeah, lyrics go through the story, just my interpretation of telling the story. Not too much, really like poetic, lyrics or anything. It's just, this is me telling the tale in my way. I do tap into utilizing different vocal styles for different parts and different characters when they're speaking. So that's something I always tend to do. Even on, like I mentioned when we were talking about Hills of the Dead last week, same kind of thing. A lot of different vocal inflections to go through the different parts. So yeah, I definitely think that someone who is a fan of those stories would enjoy listening to that, because I don't know of very much. I know there's a couple bands that sing about like Black Guy's Kiss or something, but there's not too many heavy metal songs about C.L. Moore. So yeah, it's one of my favorite songs on the album. Again, I consider it like the main song on there, and had it depicted on the artwork. So yeah, not much to say about it besides it's just another one of my long epic tributes to one of my favorite authors.
Well, our viewers will get to hear a snippet of the song at the beginning of the video, and they can go to your Bandcamp page and listen to the whole song. And I recommend that they pick up the album while they're there, if they like it, which I'm sure they will. There's no reason they wouldn't. But and the whole album's really strong. So anyway, was there anything else we wanted to cover today?
I can't think of anything else. Really enjoy talking with you as always. It's really fun to take time out and just reflect on some of these great tales. Really takes me back.
Yeah, I really enjoy it too, and we'll be doing another one soon if you like. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up. This has been Matthew Knight and Howie Bentley for Sword and Sorcery Heavy Metal. Be sure to tune in next week for the next episode.